From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Morning Line with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Nick Barris here on a Wednesday. It's good to have you. We have a good show on tap for you. As always, we like to have this guest on a regular basis to either help you, also to talk about some of the big stories in the news. And there certainly has been a big one recently that relates to the whole concept of medical malpractice and cases along those lines that affect us all. And I'm talking about the Redonda Vaught case, which we'll get into with Clint Kelly, who's our malpractice attorney here in Middle Tennessee. But I say you're the best malpractice attorney in the state.
Good morning, Jay. Well, thank you very much.
One of the best in the country.
I won't argue with you.
Well, yeah, I want to remind folks of this, too, when we talk about malpractice attorneys. There are attorneys who can handle malpractice cases, but I want to remind folks that what you are, that's all you do.
Right. I'm board certified, so we go through additional training, take oral and written exams. We have to have a certain amount of jury trials, a certain amount of skills, so that the American Board of Professional Liability Attorneys will certify us. And, you know, it's probably about 90% of what I do. Been doing it for, gosh, Nick, almost 30 years now.
30 years.
Yeah.
And the laws have changed over the years, have they not?
They have dramatically. The cases are much harder to pursue. The technicality involved in trying to form the lawsuit, get it into court, and keep it in court has gotten more difficult, and that also is dovetailed with the legislature's efforts to prevent lawsuits and to reduce recoveries or cap recoveries by injured patients. So we've had to fight through that as well.
Okay, well, we'll get into this. We can open up the phone lines. If you have a question about a case, maybe someone who was out there that thought they had a bad result from a doctor or a hospital and it was the result of malpractice,
right,
give us a call. But we should emphasize that what you deal with, civil law. Civil. You're suing for civil penalties. You don't do criminal. Sometimes, though, as we've seen of late, these types of cases can blur over into the criminal side of things, and I'm talking about Redonda Vaught, the nurse at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I represent patients who've been injured or have died as a result of medical neglect or medical mistakes. I represent their families. So I'm on that end of it, and you're right, I'm always in that situation, suing a hospital, trying to obtain a recovery for the damage that's been done. What Nurse Vaught is in is the criminal justice system, which is not about securing compensation for injured families like what I do. That is the state of Tennessee punishing Nurse Vaught and either putting her in jail, assigning different types of like probation or community corrections or other types of state-imposed penalties because she is still not only a criminal defendant, she's now a convicted felon.
Okay, and is it safe to say, though, and I don't know that it ever really went public, there was a civil side to this. I'm guessing her family was compensated. Clearly what happened, and we can talk about the criminal side in a moment, but what happened was malpractice, was it not?
There's no question about it.
I mean, that was open and shut.
That's no question about that. We don't have any record of what settlement, if any, took place. You got to believe it's likely one did. Yeah. What hospitals like Vanderbilt do is when they settle lawsuits, they're almost always confidential. You know, you hear about women who've been sexually abused signing NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. Same thing happens with patients. I could spend an entire show explaining to you the pros and cons of that, but the bottom line is we're never going to know what that case settled for. We're never going to know what the circumstances were of why it settled, other than we know the facts of the case in the criminal case were egregious.
Egregious. All right.
Yeah.
So we know then there was a civil side. What made this case different? It was criminal. And what we can say, it was back in 2017 where errors, malpractice, mistakes were made. Redonda Vaught bypassed apparently several fail-safes.
Right.
Okay. And we'll talk about why and how that happened. And as a result, her patient, who was supposed to be given an anti-anxiety drug for a scan or a PET scan or CAT scan, was given a paralytic.
A paralytic.
So, as you said, just remind folks, the nature of her death was absolutely awful.
Yeah, she was supposed to be getting Versed, which a lot of people have had who've had outpatient procedures or minor medical procedures, surgical procedures. It relaxes you, puts you in a position where, like, for example, you have CT scans or MRIs done where you're comfortable, you're not stressed, that sort of thing. It's a mild anesthetic, mild sedative. Vecuronium is what Nurse Vaught got, and this paralyzes the body. It paralyzes the diaphragm, which is the muscle that expands the lungs and allows you to breathe. And so when those muscles slowly over time are paralyzed, the patient slowly loses the ability to breathe, therefore slowly suffocates. And that process of death has been studied by scientists over many years, and it is an extraordinarily painful way to die.
It's scary. It had to be terrifying. You're conscious and you feel it happening to yourself. The poor woman. Well, all right, so there was a trial, which we've talked about, and it occurred just a couple of months ago. Redonda Vaught was found guilty of criminally negligent homicide, and the secondary charge that I fully don't understand exactly is impaired adult abuse, okay, with relation to what you just described. So what was unique about this is that the district attorney decided there were so many mistakes made that it rose to a criminal level. And there is a large segment of the population, especially in the medical community, who say it is wrong to hold someone in the nursing profession criminally responsible for what was an honest mistake. No one is saying Redonda Vaught did this intentionally. She herself cooperated and conceded that she made the mistake, okay? At no point did she deny it. And yet now she is going to be sentenced on Friday, and the potential is jail time.
Which I cannot see happening. That's just my personal opinion.
Talk about that.
Why. Well, there are a number of different reasons for this. First of all, what's getting lost in this, and the nurses who go online have said this, and it's really not much of a debate. Nurses are underpaid. They're overworked. They are put in a position where they are, in my judgment, in this particular case, set up to fail. No one wants to talk about that. Certainly no one outside of the nursing profession or the medical profession. And so what is perceived by people who work hard in hospitals is all the hospital had to do is write a check, give it to the family, and walk. Nurse Vaught, her personal liberty now is on the line. For a mistake that was, as you said, non-intentional, it was, no question, medical negligence, no question compensation should have been paid and paid quickly. But where was Vanderbilt's punishment?
Well, I'm assuming their punishment would have been in whatever civil settlement they paid out.
Well, they're self-insured, Nick, and they have money set aside to pay claims like this, and they have money in the stock market that allows them to continue to fund their self-insurance. So what we're talking about, I'm going to be completely blunt, is the difference between a mosquito bite, which Vanderbilt suffers, versus the potential of jail for the employee. Taking away someone's freedom. Yeah. And all I'm saying is the inequity between those two things. And I'm a firm believer in the justice system, but I'm a believer in the civil justice system. This case should have been in the civil justice system, and it should have been seen through the civil justice system, where money is paid, juries make decisions on what's right or wrong, policies are changed. Once we start getting into this criminal justice system with these types of cases, then I think when that happens, these types of inequities can occur because you can't hold a hospital, can't find a hospital guilty in a criminal case. Do you see what I mean?
Sure. No, I do. And many of the arguments you just made, and Redonda Vaught had a very fine local attorney, Peter Stryance, were made to a jury of peers, including what I understood, and we've never heard from any of the jurors since this verdict, but the jury of peers, including some who apparently had a background in the medical field, they heard all this. They understood all this, and they came back still with a conviction. And I think Glenn Funk, the district attorney who was behind the idea of bringing these charges, argued, Nick, I understand what Clint and what Peter Stryance said, but we have a situation here where it wasn't just 1, 2, or 3 mistakes. I mean, he itemized, and it could be up for debate, up to 18 different fail-safes and mistakes that Redonda Vaught made. And he said, Nick, when it gets to this level, I can't turn a cheek and not say that this was reckless and that it was criminal because she went so far beyond the pale. And I hear nurses saying, okay, that, well, this is going to chill nurses, and they're going to be afraid looking over their shoulders. They're going to be prosecuted.
It's going to make them hide their negligence even that much more.
And that may be a fair thing.
That's the public policy aspect of this.
But how often, seriously, do we see cases like Vaught where there are 18 or 19 fail-safes that are there? I mean, it's very rare that it's this bad.
What if there's 5?
Well,
where do you draw the line?
I'm guessing when I talked to General Funk, I mean, he was like, this was not 1, 2, 3, or 4. Maybe I would have looked at it differently. This was so many beyond in his mind, and what the jury must have felt, was that it rose to the level of criminal negligence.
I'm not second-guessing what General Funk did in this case. I'm sure he made the decision he thought was right under the circumstances, and that's why we elect officials like that, to make decisions without worrying about what the feedback or the blowback is going to be. I'm telling you, though, as a civil justice lawyer, one who's used to finding or pursuing hospitals and uncovering hospital negligence, trying to get compensation for people, when you put the health care provider, the single provider in this case, in the criminal justice system, the hospital doesn't go with her. The hospital stays out. That's the inequity that the problem I'm having with the situation.
Did she have to pay for her own attorney?
Yes.
So the hospital did not pay for Peter Stryance. That was her.
Did you see anything in the newspapers or in the interviews that led you to conclude that Vanderbilt did anything to stand behind this nurse?
I did not see that.
Okay. I mean, if you find it, we'll talk about it one day. I haven't seen anything other than the fact this nurse was kicked to the curb once the facts became out, once the facts were disclosed. And it may be because you said there were 12, 14, however many instances of a deviation of the standard of care. But the fact is, this is your employee. Mm-hmm. She made a horrible mistake, and it was a horrible death. And money should have been paid. There should have been a public apology. But you don't kick your employee to the curb. I wouldn't do that to one of mine. Mm-hmm. I would make sure that she got the best defense money could buy. I would make sure that she was able to present her case. And I would try everything I could do, try to keep her out of the criminal justice system. Now, I might, after all this is over, discharge her. Probably was the right thing to do under the circumstances, because if they kept her employed and she hurt somebody else, that would ruin Vanderbilt.
Safe to say her career as a nurse is over?
How could it not be?
Okay, so that's what, as we're going to go to the break, and when we come back from the break, James and others who are calling in will get to your call, but I want to get your thought on this then. Sentencing is Friday, and we expect likely a large contingent of nurses here to be there in support of her, but what would be gained now? Her career is over, okay? I don't know that she poses a threat to society. She's not that kind of criminal. She acknowledges the mistake. And yet, she faces the potential for jail time. I'm in agreement with you. I will tell you right now, there's no way this judge is going to sentence her to jail time. It's going to be probation. But we'll talk about what would be gained by locking her up now. Your thoughts, and you as well out there, if you have a thought along those lines, give us a call. We're talking about Redonda Vaught at the moment, but as we make our way through the program, Clint Kelly also here is a malpractice attorney. We can talk about that law and other cases maybe that you're dealing with right after this. James, stay where you are. We'll get to your call right after this.